47 minutes from boarding a flight to Houston when my boss's nephew called me into his office and told me my services were no longer needed at the firm. Not because I'd lost a case, not because a client had complained, because his fiancée, a yoga influencer with 80,000 followers and exactly 0 hours of clinical experience, was going to be the new director of patient outcomes. Here's what that 28-year-old kid in Allbirds didn't understand. Those weren't just patients on a chart. Those were people who'd been letting me into their chests and their lives for the better part of 3 decades. And come Monday morning, every single one of them was going to find out who was holding the knife. My name is Walter Hensley. I'm 58 years old, board certified in cardiothoracic surgery, and on a Tuesday in early March, I was the senior surgeon at Greenview Cardiac Institute outside Nashville, Tennessee. I'd been there 26 years. I'd performed somewhere north of 4,000 bypass procedures. The week they fired me, I had a patient named Earl Tippett, a 73-year-old retired postal carrier from Murfreesboro, prepped for a triple bypass on Thursday morning. Earl had been my patient since 1998, when I replaced his aortic valve. His wife Doreen sent me peach preserves every August. That's the kind of practice I had. The morning everything changed started ordinary. I was at the hospital by 5:15, which was late for me. 2 surgeries on the schedule, a department meeting at noon, and a consult with a woman from Knoxville whose cardiologist had been begging me to take her case. I scrubbed in at 6:40 for a mitral valve repair, finished by 10, dictated my notes, and walked down to the cafeteria for a coffee I didn't end up drinking. That's when my pager went off. Not from the floor, from the administrative wing. You have to understand something about Greenview. It was founded in 1979 by Dr. Raymond Kessler, a Korean War medic who put himself through Vanderbilt on the GI Bill and built the whole operation from a single office above a feed store in Franklin. Ray was 81 now, semi-retired, and 3 years ago he'd handed daily operations over to his nephew Brandon. Brandon had an MBA from Wharton and exactly 1 summer of healthcare consulting at a firm I'd never heard of. He drove a Tesla. He held standing meetings. He used the word synergy without irony. I knew when I saw the page that this was about the rumors. For 6 weeks now, the floor had been buzzing about Brandon's patient experience initiative. His fiancée Caitlin had been spotted in the building twice, once carrying a bullet journal and once recording a TikTok in the lobby. The nurses called her the kombucha queen. I'd assumed it was a phase, a vanity project, something he'd let her play with until she got bored and went back to selling adaptogens on Instagram. I walked into Brandon's office at 11:02. He'd inherited it from his uncle, but you wouldn't have known. The bookshelves of medical journals were gone. In their place sat a single neon sign that said FAL Fast and a stack of business books with names like Disrupt or Be Disrupted. Caitlin was perched on the leather couch in the corner, with her laptop open, drinking something green out of a mason jar. She didn't look up when I came in. Brandon gestured at the chair across from his desk like he was inviting a contractor to discuss bathroom tile. "Walter," he said, "have a seat. We need to talk about the future." I sat. I crossed one leg over the other and waited. He started in on a speech he'd clearly rehearsed. Greenview was at an inflection point. The healthcare landscape was evolving. Patients today wanted holistic, integrative, experience-driven care. The old model, and here he actually used finger quotes, the old model of scalpels and stitches was being disrupted by wellness-forward, patient-centric methodologies. The board had identified me as someone whose skill set, while admirable, didn't align with the new strategic vision. I let him finish. I'd been in operating rooms for 30 years. I knew how to wait while someone made a mess. When he was done, I asked him plainly, "Brandon, are you firing me?" He flinched at the word. "Reorganizing your role," he said. "Effective today. Caitlin will be assuming a new senior position as Director of Patient Outcomes. We feel her background in holistic wellness and her social media reach are more aligned with where the Institute is going." I looked over at Caitlin. She was still typing. She had a sticker on her laptop that said, "Good vibes only." "I have a patient on the schedule for Thursday morning," I said. "Earl Tippett, triple bypass. He's 73. He's been my patient for 26 years. Brandon nodded like he was very wise. "We've got that covered." Dr. Mund. Westbrook will take over Mr. Tippett's case. Marcus Westbrook had been at Greenview for 2 years. He was a perfectly competent vascular surgeon. He had never performed a coronary artery bypass graft as lead. Not once. I have a consult at 2 o'clock today, I said. Not once. I have a consult at 2 o'clock today, I said. Mrs. Harriet Vance, from Knoxville. She has a left ventricular aneurysm and a complicated cardiac history. Her referring physician specifically asked for me. Caitlin looked up from her laptop for the first time. We've already reached out to Mrs. Vance, she said. Her smile was the smile of a woman who'd never told anyone bad news in her life. We're going to offer her a complimentary consultation with our new integrative wellness panel before she commits to any invasive procedures. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. An integrated wellness panel for a woman with a ventricular aneurysm. They were going to recommend turmeric and breathing exercises to a 68-year-old with a ticking time bomb in her chest. Brandon slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a separation agreement, an NDA, and a non-compete clause that prohibited me from practicing cardiothoracic surgery within a 100-mile radius of Nashville for 24 months. 6 months severance. Continuation of health insurance through the end of the calendar year. Vested pension untouched. I looked down at the paperwork. I looked back up at Brandon. I want to be very clear about something, I said. You understand that I am the only board-certified cardiothoracic surgeon at this institute who has independent admitting privileges at St. Bartholomew's, Vanderbilt, and TriStar. You understand that. He smiled. We're aware of your credentials, Walter. That's why we're being so generous. Generous. That word sat there in the air between us. I'll need a day, I said. He shook his head. Today, Walter, we've been advised that a clean break is best for everyone. Security will help you collect your personal items. Security. They had security waiting for me. After 26 years, I stood up slowly. My knees popped the way they always do after I'd been on my feet in surgery for hours. I picked up the folder. I didn't sign anything. I told him I'd have my attorney review the documents and get back to him by Friday. He didn't like that. I could see it on his face. He'd expected me to either explode or comply. The third option, the polite refusal, threw him off. Walter, he said, and his voice had a little edge to it now. We'd really like to wrap this up today. I'm sure you would, I said. And then I walked out of his office and down the hall to mine. You want to know what kept me upright on that walk? It wasn't pride. It wasn't anger. It was a list. While Brandon had been talking about disruption, my brain had been making a list, the way it always made lists during long surgeries. A list of everything I had that he didn't know I had. A list of every name in my phone he'd never bothered to learn. A list of every doctor in 3 states who'd referred me a patient over the last decade. By the time I reached my office, the list was long. I called my wife Marlene from the car. We'd been married 34 years. She put me through residency working as a school nurse in Williamson County. She knew me well enough to hear it in my voice in 3 syllables. What happened? She said. I told her. The whole thing. Brandon, Caitlin, the patient outcomes director, the security guard hovering in the doorway while I packed up my framed diploma from Vanderbilt and the photograph of my late father in his Marine Corps dress blues. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Walt, what do you need? I need you to call our daughter Hannah, I said. Hannah was a healthcare attorney in Atlanta. She'd done her undergrad at SUNY and her JD at Emory, and she had spent the last 6 years specifically litigating physician contract disputes. We'd joked for years that she'd gone into the family business sideways. I'll call her right now, Marlene said. Are you driving safely? I'm driving fine, Walter. Yeah. She paused. Don't sign a damn thing. I'm not. Good. I drove home the long way, down through Leaper's Fork, past the Halls Farms and the old stone walls. I needed the time to think. By the time I pulled into our driveway in Brentwood, I had a plan. Not a complete one, but the bones of one. Hannah arrived from Atlanta on Wednesday morning. She brought a yellow legal pad, a thermos of coffee, and the calm fury of a woman who'd been waiting her whole life to defend her father. We sat at the kitchen table for 6 hours. I walked her through the contract, the NDA, the non-compete, every word Brandon had said in that office. She took notes. She asked questions. She made calls to 2 former classmates who specialized in restrictive covenanters. By Wednesday night, Hannah had 3 observations. 1. The non-compete was almost certainly unenforceable in Tennessee for a physician, with my specialty in this geographic area, given the public interest exception. The state had specific case law protecting patient access to specialized cardiac care. 2. The NDA had been drafted by someone who didn't understand what physicians actually own. My patient relationships were governed by HIPAA and by the doctor-patient relationship itself. Patients had the right to follow their physicians. No NDA could prevent a patient from choosing to keep seeing me. 3. Brandon had made a procedural error. The separation agreement claimed my termination was for strategic realignment. But under the bylaws of the Institute, which Hannah had pulled from the Secretary of State's website, any termination of a senior medical staff member required a vote of the Medical Executive Committee. There had been no such vote. He'd fired me unilaterally, and he didn't have the authority to do it. "We have him," Hannah said. "We absolutely have him. But here's the thing. I didn't want to sue. Not yet. A lawsuit would take 18 months and $100,000 in fees. What I wanted was simpler and more permanent than a courtroom victory. I wanted my patients to know." Thursday morning, I drove to a Cracker Barrel in Cool Springs and met Earl Tippett and Doreen for breakfast. Earl was confused. He'd gotten a call from Greenview at 6 the previous evening telling him his Thursday surgery was being rescheduled and that a Dr. Westbrook would be performing it on Tuesday. "Earl," I said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to know I'm telling you this as a friend, not as your doctor." I told him I'd been let go. I told him why. I didn't badmouth Brandon or Caitlin. I just laid out the facts. I told him Marcus Westbrook was a fine surgeon but had never performed a CABG as lead. I told him that he had every right to seek his procedure elsewhere with any surgeon he chose. Earl looked at Doreen. Doreen looked at me. Then Earl said, "Walt, where are you going to be working?" "I don't know yet," I said. "You let me know when you do," he said. "I'll wait." I told him I couldn't ask him to wait. He had unstable angina. He needed surgery within the next 4 to 6 weeks. "Then I'll wait 4 weeks," he said, and he reached across the table and shook my hand. That's how it started. I had no website, no clinic, no partnership lined up. I had a list of 73 active patients in my personal phone, every one of whom I treated for more than 5 years. And I had a network, a real one. Not the kind you build on LinkedIn, the kind you build over 26 years of phone calls at 3 in the morning to colleagues at other hospitals, asking them to fit your patient in, returning the favor when they called you. Friday, I called Dr. Cardig, Margaret Aldridge at St. Bartholomew's. She'd been chief of cardiology there for 15 years. We'd done 100 cases together. I told her what had happened. She listened without interrupting, the way good doctors do. "Walter," she said when I was finished, "we've been talking for 2 years about expanding our cardiothoracic program. I want you to come in on Monday morning and meet with our medical director." I came in on Monday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, I had an offer. Senior surgeon, full admitting privileges, a guaranteed block of OR time, and the freedom to bring my patients with me. The hospital would handle the contract negotiations. Their general counsel would write a letter to Greenview, making it clear that any attempt to enforce the non-compete would be met with a public interest challenge that Greenview was almost certainly going to lose. I started at St. Bartholomew's on the 2nd Monday in April. What happened over the next 11 weeks, I want to describe carefully because it didn't happen the way a movie would tell you. There was no big confrontation, no moment where I stood in front of Brandon and gave him a speech. The truth is duller and more terrible than that. The truth is that institutions die quietly, the way old men die. One organ at a time. Week 1. Earl Tippett had his triple bypass at St. Bartholomew's on a Tuesday morning. It went textbook. Doreen brought peach preserves to my new office, which didn't have a desk yet. She cried a little. So did I. When she left. Week 2. Mrs. Harriet Vance, the woman from Knoxville with the ventricular aneurysm, called my home. Apparently her referring cardiologist had told her where I'd gone. She drove down on Thursday with her husband. I scheduled her surgery for the following Monday. It went well. She was discharged in 5 days. Week 3. The phone calls started coming faster. Patients I hadn't heard from in months were calling, telling me their annual follow-ups had been rescheduled or cancelled. One woman, a retired teacher from Hendersonville named Bess Carrollton, told me she'd shown up for her appointment at Greenview and been seen by Caitlin herself, who had recommended she try a cardiac coherence breathing protocol instead of her beta blocker. Bess had been on that beta blocker for 11 years. I told her to come in to St. Bartholomew's the next morning. Week 4. I got a call from a referring physician in Cookeville. He'd been sending me patients for 9 years. He told me that one of his patients had gone to Greenview for a stent placement and had been told the procedure was outdated and that they should consider a non-invasive cardiovascular renewal program that involved infrared sauna sessions and a proprietary supplement blend. The patient had a 90% occlusion in the left anterior descending. We call that one the widowmaker. Without a stent, that man was dead within 6 months. The referring physician told me he was suspending all referrals to Greenview until further notice. By the end of the week, every cardiologist in the regional network had done the same. Week 5. I got a phone call from Marcus Westbrook. He was the surgeon Brandon had assigned to take over my cases. He asked if we could meet for coffee. We met at a Starbucks in Green Hills. Marcus looked like a man who hadn't slept in a month. He told me Greenview's surgical schedule had collapsed. Patients were cancelling. The OR was running at 20% capacity. He'd been pulled into emergency meetings where Brandon was demanding that Marcus take on cases he wasn't qualified for. He'd refused twice. He didn't think he could refuse a third time without being fired himself. "Walter," he said, "I've got 2 kids in private school. I can't afford to be unemployed." I told him to start sending out his CV. I told him I'd put in a word at St. Bartholomew's. I told him there would be a wave coming and he wanted to be ahead of it. He thanked me. He didn't quite cry, but it was close. Week 6. The first lawsuit was filed against Greenview, a family in Maury County, whose father had died of a heart attack 2 weeks after being placed on a wellness-forward cardiac management plan by Caitlin. The plan had involved discontinuing his Plavix. The man had involved discontinuing his Plavix. The man had a stent that was less than a year old. Stopping Plavix on a fresh stent is a death sentence, and every cardiologist on earth knows it. Caitlin didn't, because Caitlin had a degree in communications from a community college in Phoenix. The lawsuit named Brandon personally. It named Caitlin personally. It named the institute. It sought punitive damages. Week 7. The Tennessee Department of Health opened an investigation. Week 8. 2 more lawsuits filed. 1 for malpractice, 1 for fraud. Week 9. The Board of Directors of Greenview Cardiac Institute held an emergency meeting. I know this because Ray Kessler called me on a Sunday afternoon. The old man's voice was thin and tired. I hadn't spoken to him in 3 years. "Walter," he said, "I am asking you as a personal favor to me to consider coming back." I didn't say anything for a long moment. I was sitting on my back porch watching a redbud tree bloom. Marlene was inside cooking dinner. "Ray," I said, "I respect you. I always have. You built something good, but your nephew burned it down. And your nephew's fiancée poured the gasoline. There is nothing left for me to come back to." He said something I didn't expect. He said, "I know Walter. I just had to ask." Then he said, "I'm sorry I left it in his hands." I told him I was sorry too. I meant it. Week 10. Brandon was removed as Chief Operating Officer by the board. Caitlin was terminated from her position as Director of Patient Outcomes. The Institute issued a press release about a strategic leadership transition. It fooled no one. Week 11. Greenview Cardiac Institute filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The story made the front page of the Tennessean. A reporter named Cassie Holcomb called me for comment. I told her I had no comment on the institute itself, but that my prayers were with the staff, the nurses, and the patients caught in the middle. I meant that too. Most of the people at Greenview had been good people. Brandon had ruined their lives along with his own. 28 of my former patients had transferred their care to me at St. Bartholomew's by then. Within 6 months it would be 41. I want to tell you about one more thing. About 4 months after the bankruptcy filing, I was eating lunch at a Meat and 3 on 8th Avenue South, place called Arnold's. I've been going there for 20 years. I was eating turnip greens and meatloaf and reading the sports section. Brandon walked in. Alone. He looked smaller than I remembered. He'd lost weight. His hair was longer. He wasn't wearing Allbirds. He was wearing Allbirds. He was wearing actual leather shoes that he'd seen somewhere. He saw me and froze for a second, and then he made a decision and walked over to my table. "Dr. Hensley," he said, "can I sit down for a minute?" I gestured at the seat across from me. He sat. He was quiet for a long time. He looked at the menu without reading it. Finally, he said, "I owe you an apology." I waited. "I don't know what I was thinking," he said. "With Caitlin. With all of it was thinking," he said. "With Caitlin. With all of it. I thought I was being innovative. I thought my uncle's whole generation was clinging to the past. I thought I knew better." He looked up at me. His eyes were red. "I'm getting divorced," he said. "The lawsuits took everything. My uncle won't talk to me. My parents are barely speaking to me. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I did to you. I'm sorry for what I did to those patients. I think about Mr. Allensworth every night, the man whose Plavix." He couldn't finish the sentence. I looked at him for a long time. I thought about Earl Tippett, who was healthy and home in Murfreesboro. I thought about Mrs. Vance, who'd sent me a Christmas card. I thought about the man whose name Brandon couldn't say without breaking. The man who had died because a yoga instructor had told him to stop taking the medication keeping him alive. "Brandon," I said, "I appreciate that you came over here. I'm not going to forgive you today. I might never forgive you, but I'll say this. The fact that you can't finish that man's name, that's the start of being a real person. Sit with that. Don't run from it." He nodded. He didn't say anything else. He got up and he left without ordering. I finished my meatloaf. I'm 61 now. I still operate 3 days a week at St. Bartholomew's. Marlene retired from the school district last spring, and we bought a little farm outside of Liper's Fork where we keep 2 horses and a goat named Wilbur. Hannah made partner at her firm in Atlanta. My son Drew is finishing his residency in pediatrics at Cincinnati Children's. Earl Tippett is 80 and just celebrated his 55th wedding anniversary with Doreen. People ask me sometimes when the story comes up whether I feel vindicated, whether watching Greenview collapse felt good. The honest answer is no, it didn't feel good. It felt like watching a barn burn down with horses inside that you couldn't get to in time. Brandon was a fool. Caitlin was a fraud. But the people who paid the price weren't them. The people who paid the price were the nurses who lost their jobs, the patients who died, the families who buried their fathers and husbands too soon. What I learned, what I want anybody listening to this to understand, is that competence is not glamorous. It does not trend. It does not get you on TikTok. It is built 1 quiet hour at a time, over decades, by people who show up when they don't feel like it, who study when they'd rather sleep, who take the call at 3 in the morning because somebody's mother is dying. That kind of competence is the most precious thing in any hospital, in any law firm, in any factory floor in America. You cannot replace it with an MBA and a mood board. You cannot replace it with a wellness coach and a hashtag. And when you try, people die. I was fired by my boss's nephew on a Tuesday in March. 28 of my patients followed me. The institute that fired me is gone. I am still here, doing the work I've done my whole life, with the people who trusted me to do it. That's the whole story. That's all of it. And if there's a young man somewhere watching this who thinks he's going to walk into a place that some old guy built with his bare hands and improve it by firing the people who actually know how things work, I want him to hear me very clearly. You won't. You'll burn it down, and then you'll have to live with what you did. I hope for his sake he listens. I've been turning this whole thing over in my head for almost 3 years now, and I think I've finally landed on what it actually taught me. The night Brandon walked into Arnold's and sat across from me with that broken look on his face, I went home and I couldn't sleep. Marlene was already in bed. I sat on the porch with a glass of bourbon and I thought about cause and effect, about how Brandon had made a small choice on the Tuesday in March, and that small choice had set in motion a chain of events that buried a 46-year-old institution and put a man named Mr. Allensworth in the ground. Brandon didn't intend any of that. He just wanted to make his fiancée happy and feel like a big shot. But intentions don't matter when consequences are already moving. Once you push the rock off the cliff, the rock is going where the rock is going. and you can apologize to the people standing at the bottom for the rest of your life, and it will not bring them back. That's the first thing. Every choice we make is a stone we're throwing into still water, and the ripples don't stop just because we change our minds. The second thing is harder to say without sounding like a man giving a graduation speech, so forgive me. What got me through those 11 weeks wasn't anger. Anger burns hot and fast and leaves you tired. What got me through was something quieter. It was the 26 years of small, boring, repetitive work I'd done before any of this happened. The 4,000 bypasses. The fork holes at 3 in the morning. The Christmases I spent in the OR. The colleagues I'd helped without expecting anything back. None of that felt heroic at the time. It just felt like the job. But when the floor dropped out from under me, that's the floor I was standing on, and it held. You build that floor with your character, and you build it with your patience, and you build it with the kind of stubborn refusal to cut corners that the world will tell you is old-fashioned. Earl Tippett didn't follow me to St. Bartholomew's because I gave him a good speech in a Cracker Barrel. He followed me because for 26 years I had returned his phone calls and remembered his wife's name and shown up when I said I would. The last thing I want to say, and then I'll let you go, is this. There is a young man in your life right now, somewhere, who thinks he's smarter than the people who came before him. Maybe he's your son. Maybe he's your boss. Maybe he's you looking back. Tell him the truth. Tell him that real authority is not inherited, and it is not bought, and it cannot be faked. It is earned, slowly, by people who keep their word in small things until they are trusted with large ones. That is the only ladder that holds weight. Every other ladder, sooner or later, breaks under the man climbing it. I'm 61. I'm still climbing. And the rungs still hold.